Good evening, class. This evening, I'm going to be reading to you from a book that I'm quite fond of called A Few Red Drops, The Chicago Race Riot of 1919 by Claire Hartfield. As you can tell, so race riot, the term riot usually associated with violence and chaos, and in the context of American history, race is often referred to racism or problems between white people and African Americans and other minorities in the United States. So we've said Chicago, race riot, that means there's going to be violence and it's going to involve disagreements between white people and African Americans. I'm not going to read the whole book for you, obviously, that would take too long, but I am going to read a portion of it for you tonight and help you interpret how to get ideas out of this book. So start with section chapter 11, A Real Place for Negroes. I'm sorry, I have to use that term because it's the term the book uses. Negro, for those who don't know, is a insulting term used to describe African Americans in the United States from back in times when they were enslaved to even today. If you can't tell, sorry telling this, there's a little blood spatter around the chapter title in this book. Like I said, the cover's red. We're talking about race riots, blood spilled. It's a nice little descriptive detail in the chapter cover that I really like. Those details are what you need to pick up on so you can see the core ideas that the book is looking into. So I start with, the Illinois Central carried its passengers through the green hills and forests of Mississippi, up through Tennessee and Kentucky, across the bridge over the Ohio River into Cairo, Illinois, over the flat prairie land of central Illinois. Okay, so some major terms are coming up in that sentence that you might not be familiar with. So Illinois Central, that's a proper term, that name for something that you might not know what it is off the bat. When you see terms like that, if you don't have a computer in front of you, I kind of want you to keep a notebook, make note of those terms so that you have a sense of, well, why was this term used? What does it mean? Why is it important that that term was used? So in this context, for those who don't know, the Illinois Central is a train. It's a common form of transportation back then. So we can see this through the green hills and forests of Mississippi, up through Tennessee and Kentucky, across the bridge over the Ohio River into Cairo, Illinois. So you think about a map, you have, so Mississippi, if you're from Louisiana like I am, it's in the deep southern part of the United States. So if you're traveling on a train starting in Mississippi and you're going through Tennessee and then Kentucky and then up to Illinois, you're going north. And that's very, very north. That's all the way across the United States from where Mississippi is, depending on where you are. So that's a long train ride for people to take from one side of the country to the other. From south to north. So I want you to think about, why would anyone take that train ride? Why would anyone feel the need to go that far north? As the train drew close to Chicago, greenery and blue sky were replaced by a canopy of gray smoke spewed into the air by the nearby steel mills, and passengers could begin to anticipate the gritty might of the city. Okay, so that imagery of greenery and blue sky replaced by a canopy of gray smoke spewed into the air. So when you think blue sky, greenery, you're thinking natural environment. So you're thinking fields or forests with trees and grass and things like that. And all that's replaced by gray and smoke spewed into the air. And you're thinking a big city, you're thinking factories, you're thinking man-made structures instead of natural environments. So and usually those terminology, gray smoke, canopy, spewed into the air, those are very negative descriptors. So the impression that I'm getting from this is that, well, for people coming from Mississippi on this train all the way to Chicago, that maybe they don't necessarily like what they see when they first get here. It's steel mills is where you're getting, and passengers could begin to anticipate the gritty might of the cities. Again, when they get to Chicago, your first reaction is not necessarily excitement; it's more fear or nerves or anticipation of something. It's a gritty might being a synonym for power. So maybe when these people are getting off the train, they don't know what to expect. So that's a term. That's a way. What is that? Can you think of any time in your life where you felt like when you were going somewhere you didn't know what was going to happen, and how did that make you feel? When the train pulled into Chicago's Illinois Central Station, passengers were disgorged into the hustle and bustle of a city that was excited but also immensely intimidating. All right, so again, that's another vocabulary term I can't imagine many of you are all that familiar with because it's not used that often. So disgorged. So we don't know that word. I don't know what that word means off the top of my head. So I want you to think, okay, so, but it's a verb. And so it's used, so we should break down the portions of that word to see why it was used in the sense of people exiting a train into Chicago Central Station. So we think gorge. We think of gorge, what's the term? We think of eating, think of overeating, lots of eating. So, and dis is usually a prefix used to indicate the opposite of something. So if gorge is to eat and dis is the opposite of that, then if disgorge is the opposite of to eat, then maybe the opposite of eating, maybe throwing up or puking, vomiting. Those are all words that could potentially this could mean. So what does that imagery spew in your mind when you hear hundreds of people being vomited out into the streets of Chicago by trains? Is that a positive image? Is that an ugly image? Why would that visualization be used? What do you think of when you think of a whole group of people being vomited out onto the streets? Ida Wells Barnett, that's a person, so this is going to be a quote coming up, observed, "They arrived in Chicago in every conceivable state of unpreparedness." So let's unpack that quote a little bit. So every conceivable state. So when you think, so conceivable means, so what could you think of? What are possibilities? So it's every conceivable. So that term would think, okay, so all possible options, all possible things you could think of, and state of unpreparedness. Okay, so now another word you might not be familiar with off the top of your head. So prepare is to make ready, to do work ahead of time, to make sure things are set so that you are able to do something. So if you are unprepared, then you are not ready to do something. You are incapable of doing something because you haven't done the work ahead of time. So if all these people took a long train ride just to be unprepared, what state do you think they might be in when they reach Chicago? The station's grand 3-story marble waiting room was housed below a 45-foot vaulted ceiling. So sort of visualize what that looks like. 3-story building, marble. It's a type of very polished stone, 45 feet tall. It's a big, big building for a train station. Shimmering under immense shafts of light that poured through long windows lining the room. There, hundreds of people rushed out. So rushing. Everyone's in a hurry. Everyone's trying to get somewhere. Many in the Hattiesburg contingent had written back and forth about the specifics of their arrival. The luckiest migrants were scooped up out of the chaos by waiting friends or relatives. So, scooped up out of the chaos. So, all these people exiting, as it sort of suggested earlier, vomited out of the train station in large numbers. You have, so if it's chaos, there's lots of people moving, lots of disorganization, no one knowing what to do or where to go. So, does that sound like a positive image? Does a train station with lots of people in it sound like a place you really want to be for very long? Some came with no one expecting them. Others arrived with only an address in hand, expecting to find their way to prearranged housing. Okay, so if you're moving to Chicago from, so Hattiesburg, it's a city in Mississippi. That's probably where they got on the train from. And so if you're moving somewhere, you want a house, you want a place to live. So prearranged housing, so you had a plan, but maybe not a person, so all you have is an address, like on a letter. So, and if you arrive in a city with no one to help you in a place that's very unhelpful, is that address going to do you much good? What kind of mental state would you be in trying to process how to handle just essential, a couple of numbers and letters on a piece of paper? Some came with no one expecting them, making the journey on faith. I'll say, take that journey on faith. So you do something on faith, you have no logical basis for it. You have no evidence. You have nothing to support what you're doing. So why would you come to such chaos on faith? What could be so bad about where you were that you would feel the need to come there on faith? Arriving unannounced and unequipped with no planned course of action beyond their first steps off the train. Okay, so like I said, all these people spewed out onto the train in chaos, running around, not knowing what to do or where to go. Why would you not do what would compel you to come to this chaos without a plan? What would you hope to get on faith, as it suggested? What that could be there based on the way that's written. One migrant recalled his fear of being completely lost, afraid to ask anyone where to go. So again, with the chaos, like a lot of people going somewhere, a lot of people wanting to go somewhere, a lot of people got there but then had no idea where to go once they got there. So with that in mind, what did they hope to get? What do you think the author is suggesting people want that they would put up with what the author seems to suggest is a really horrible situation?